This week, we got a trade that rocked the PWHL. So who won, Toronto or Ottawa? We'll talk about that and so much more on today's Women's Hockey Report.
This is the Women's Hockey Report presented by Locked On NHL. Your weekly look at the world of women's hockey. From the PWHL to the international stage, it's the Women's Hockey Report on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Women's Hockey Report. My name is Erica L. Ayala. I am also your host of Locked On Kraken, joined once again by Rachel Donner, one of your hosts of Locked On Flyers. Before we get into this big trade, Rachel, let's do a check-in, vibe check. How you feeling?
Really good. So much good PWHL hockey this week. Not just the big trade, but other games causing some really interesting reactions, I think.
Oh, for sure. And I'm just excited that I'll get to see some PWHL action. So we'll get into all of that action. But first, let me tell you that today's episode of the Women's Hockey Report brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And Rachel, where we're going to get started is with what a lot of people are calling a blockbuster trade in the PWHL. Now, not the first trade that we've seen in the league, and certainly not the first trade that we've seen in women's hockey, former iterations of the pro game, but this one, as the youths say, hit a little different. Let's break it down, Rachel.
Yeah, so it was between the Ottawa Charge and Toronto Scepters, who were in the lower portion of the standing. So obviously each team thought they had to do something. So Ottawa gets Victoria Bach and Jocelyn, Larocque, veteran player there. And Toronto receives also a veteran, Haley Scamurra, and Savannah Harmon. And it was a very shocking trade for everybody. And, we'll hear from, management, et cetera, on it. But I think that having, Larocque, who was a second overall pick in the 2023 draft, involved in this was a huge, huge deal. Savannah Harmon was the 5th overall pick in that 2023 draft. So important key, cornerstone players of Ottawa and Toronto involved.
Yeah, and I think that's what made it a little bit of a surprise, obviously to the players involved, but certainly for fans and for media. I think also what you're seeing is that, there are certain players that are getting used to this being, a league that, as we've heard them say, that they really wanted, right? That this is what pro hockey means to a lot of people, that you have trades. That also means, though, that how you communicate these trades, how they happen, is something that a lot of people are still navigating. As you mentioned, we're going to hear from the players in just a bit. But, for me, I think it was interesting to hear the GMs speak. So we had video calls with the GMs first, and I didn't get a really strong sense from Toronto why this trade was made, or at least nothing that Gina Kingsbury from Toronto really wanted to divulge. She talked a lot about this is what professionalism in hockey looks like, but I didn't get a clear sense on the how, the why. This is what Toronto needed. We do know that Savannah Harmon and Renata Fost have some prior experience at the collegiate level. We also saw that Haley Scamurra, who's played for USA Hockey, actually got her start through pro hockey to make the national team, which is always a great story, was on that line with Blair Turnbull. And they had the option to participate in that morning skate because they got traded. And then not even a full 24 hours later, we're doing post game after playing the team, Rachel.
I know.
They just got traded from.
To be fair, that's the best kind of trade from an outside observer.
Yeah, right.
Inside, I'm sure it's different.
Right. Pure chaos. And again, we're going to hear from them shortly. But those two, they did have the option. Well, it was an optional morning skate for all players. They participated in that. And then Kingsbury said that they were given the option on whether they actually wanted to play. So that being Savannah Harmon and Haley Scamurra both said yes. Now, on the side of Ottawa with Michael Hirschfeld, said it was a whirlwind, that these two teams had been talking prior to trying to get a deal. I think we just got a little bit more from Ottawa. I think that this was really about figuring out the right blend of leadership to bring to Ottawa. And so that's what you get from Larocque, right? Someone who played in pro women's hockey at the international stage, an Olympian, actually has played, cut her teeth early in Hockey Canada with now who is her, who was once her veteran on Hockey Canada and now is her coach, Carla McLeod. We'll hear a little bit from that. But also, I thought it was interesting how Mike Hirschfeld talked about Victoria Bach. This is someone who, at the college level, even at times with Hockey Canada, we see, Rachel, that Bach can be a dynamic scorer. I got to see her play also in the CWHL, and play with that Markham team. Seems to have gotten lost in the sauce, not just with the national team in the last handful of years, but also with Toronto. And those two might be more closely linked than some people, and by some people I mean me, are comfortable with. And so for whatever reason, and also Victoria Bach, and this was mentioned in the press conferences or the video calls, that she had some schooling that she was finishing up. Again, the league started quick runway to what now is, I guess we should also say, right, Rachel, like happy anniversary PWHL, because we're already in a new year. But so Victoria Bach was coming to Toronto as they started that surge, right? They had that long winning streak, and how much do you kind of change things around when you're winning? So this was an opportunity for Ottawa to get a dynamic scorer who, I don't think a lot of people in the league had a really good scout on what she, that kind of, what have you done for me lately? I think it's also interesting that, some of the scouts for Ottawa include Victoria's former coach, Brian DeRocher, who was at BU for a long time. And those are the voices that Ottawa was really listening to. They also mentioned Jessica Campbell, who of course Kraken fans know, she's one of our assistant coaches. So I think they see a lot of promise from a leadership perspective, but also from the offensive side. Again, didn't really get much from the Toronto the Toronto call, except that this is getting more comfortable with professional hockey.
Yeah. And that's what was so weird to me, that there was so much more of a reason for Ottawa to do this trade than for Toronto. And I feel like in the long run, maybe that's who might benefit more from it.
Yes, and we're definitely going to get into that. I think it's also just maybe Toronto keeping their their cards close to the chest, so to speak. But I think we have to be honest. Another thing about being a professional league is you have to expect that reporters are going to ask, what was it about your team that made this trade beneficial? Why did you want to do this? What were you expecting to get out of it? And I think we got a little bit more of a concrete answer on the vision from Ottawa than Toronto. But let's hear what the players had to say. We're going to first hear from Toronto. So Haley Scamurra here, but also Renata Fost, as we mentioned, her D partner for a very long time, moving over to Ottawa. And then we'll hear from Jocelyn Larocque, and you'll kind of get to hear and see the emotion from these players.
It was incredible, honestly. I think it's been a whirlwind, obviously, but this morning we had pregame skate with the girls, and they couldn't have been more welcoming, and the coaching staff and just everyone. So it's been an easy transition as you can make it. For sure. We'll figure out when we're moving and leaving Ottawa and things like that. So I think the shock will come in waves, to be honest with you. But yeah, all the girls have made it as easy as possible for me, so it's been good so far.
Yeah, definitely emotional. It's tough to see someone who means so much to the team and the organization, and someone who's been a big part of the player that I am today, to see her move to a different team. But like you said, Savs and I have like a history together, and we're really good friends. And yeah, it was kind of comfort knowing that Savs was coming as well, and I had that comfort with her. So yeah, a tough day, but we'll process it and get through it.
And so, Rachel, you can hear the emotion there. That was, again, Renata Faust and Haley Scamurra talking. But we also heard from Jocelyn Larocque, and I want to hear from her. And then after we hear from Jocelyn, Rachel, let's get into what happened on the ice when these two teams played and who we think won this trade. But let's hear from Larocque first.
Yeah, I would say that was probably the craziest, weirdest game of my life. But I mean, I'm feeling a lot of shock. I don't even think I've allowed myself to process it, just seeing how there was a game so close to when I found out that I was traded. So my mind was just like, get ready for the game coming up. And then tomorrow I can figure out, my emotions and where I'm going to live and all of that stuff. So, but honestly, Ottawa's been so welcoming, the staff, the players. I had a lot of fun today, and honestly, I wasn't sure if I was going to. So, yeah, I had fun. No, definitely nothing like this. This is a game that I'll remember for the rest of my life. It was odd. It was bizarre, especially that we were playing in Toronto. I mean, I think it was closure. Yeah, it was a goodbye. And, I've had, I'm going to get emotional. I've had a lot of great memories in Toronto, and I'll cherish them forever, so.
Were you ever tempted to turn around and shoot on that?
Nope.
Or to pass to someone in
No, you know what? I actually was worried about that, and it never happened once, so I'm happy about that. I was like, can you imagine tape to tape right in the slot or something?
I was more worried about Bach doing it maybe.
So, a consummate pro there, did not shoot on her new goaltender. Neither did Victoria Bach, as we heard from Emmer and Smashmeyer. But we are going to hear a little bit from Carla McLeod, both about the trade, the professionalism, and then also, again, what these teams expected. And Rachel and I will divulge who we think won the trade. All of that coming up on the Women's Hockey Report.
The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up that W. Not only can you bet on who will win the football game, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, and how many points each team will score, and so much more. And for NHL picks, there are also options like first goal scored, player shots on goal thresholds, over under on total goals, and so much more. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Welcome back to the Women's Hockey Report. I love that there was a little levity at the end of that very tough clip.
I almost cried again.
I know, it's emotional. And I think that, and we're going to hear from Carla in just a moment, I think that there's a little bit of and this happens in the NHL too, right? I mean, the Seattle Kraken just recently had a trade, an emotional trade because of, healthy scratches and things of that nature. And the Rangers just kind of being a little bit of a hot mess. Like we can speak, that being the Kraken. Anyway, the point is that trades can be very emotional, even in a league that's, 100 plus years old, and these things are quote unquote expected, but we definitely saw the emotion there. Jocelyn has made Toronto home, now trying to figure out a new home. And there are things in the CBA for those maybe who not as familiar with the PWHL CBA, but there will be stipends and things of this nature. The teams, of course, will be able to help with that transition. Again, that's something that we haven't always seen or hasn't been disclosed in women's hockey. So that part I think is worth noting. But I mean, Carla McLeod also saying, I mean, this is tough for all of us. So let's play that clip.
I'll say this big line in our league, oh, this is pro, but we're still all human. So there's been a lot of emotion on both sides from everyone involved, and of course the game happening so quickly. Yeah, there's variables for sure that factored in tonight, and you could see the emotion on some of the girls' faces after the game. So it is part of the pro league, and it's something, but we're new to this, so we're learning to manage it as people and make sure that everyone's in a good spot.
I mean, so we hear the emotion there, Rachel, but this is also, these two teams played each other, right? And we know that Toronto, they needed a win. They were able to get some wins throughout the week. We'll talk about that. But this was a really good test to see not just about this trade, but what is the real trajectory of these two teams? So let's break this one down because it was spicy, not just because of the trade, but there's a lot of spiciness on the ice as well.
Yeah, so obviously, you look at the game results and you have to say, well, Ottawa won the trade, right? Because they won the game. I mean, I say that in jest, but I do think there's something to it because with Toronto, their struggles, I think, were not solved by this trade. They were kind of been floating off in the breeze, trying to find cohesive offense here. And trading a player like Larocque in this environment, when you don't have Spooner out on the ice, Sarah Nurse is doing her best out there, but I feel like she's on an island by herself trying to solve everything on her own. Like, how does more upheaval solve this problem for Toronto? I think, skill-wise on paper, sure, you can say that Toronto won this trade, but I just don't think it was the right move at the right time for them.
It doesn't seem that way. And it's tough because you think of Savannah Harmon, you think of Haley Scamurra, and those are fantastic players. Why wouldn't
Absolutely.
you want to add those players? And again, the recipe and maybe it honestly for me just boils down to how it was communicated, but I get the sense that Ottawa just was able to really lean into what they were looking for. They wanted leadership, particularly on the back end. And I think that if we look at this game, this is an Ottawa Charge team. They play very aggressive. There was a 5-minute penalty and a game misconduct. On Vanishova, who is a great scorer for them, very physical play. The hit, actually, Renata Foss took that hit. But, did I think it was an egregious, like a dirty hit? No. Do I understand why it was called within how hockey is called? Yes. I think it could have been maybe one of those borderline hits. But the reason that I like Larocque coming to an Ottawa team is because you need players that can help just reset and calm this Ottawa team down. And they had to kill off a 5-minute major. They don't have one of their best scorers there. There was a goal, that was recalled, Emily Clark kicking motion. And, I think that whether Larocque had a direct impact on this game or not, I think my takeaway is that she will have an impact in moments like that. And I think for me, that's what Ottawa needed. I also think that if anyone was going to break free on a revenge game, it didn't happen, but Victoria Bach, I think, has a lot to prove still. And if Ottawa made it clear she will get top 6 minutes. And I think that's going to be huge as well.
Yeah, I think so. For her, I'd honestly, her getting traded is the thing that makes the most sense of anything because just in terms of a change of scenery, like you talk about change of scenery trades, makes perfect sense for her to do all of the points that you've already mentioned. And I think that, you look at an Ottawa team that really wanted to turn things around, who's had stretches of absolutely brilliant play, followed up by boneheaded mistakes or just getting overwhelmed. And they needed to clean things up. And this
Yes.
trade cleans things up for them. Plus, the last 2 games, they've gotten incredible play in net
Oh,
from Emrance
so good.
Mashmeyer. She faced 35 shots in the previous game against the Sirens, 38 shots in this game against Toronto. Toronto put all the shots on the board they
Mhm.
could, but Mashmeyer backstopped them. And I
Yeah.
think that helps propel the team overall. Like, I think Ottawa plays better in front of Mashmeyer now, right?
Mm. Yeah, I agree with you. And Mashmeyer talked about that a little bit. Says as a goaltender, you hear this all the time from goalies. You wanna see rubber, you wanna feel rubber. She also said though that her team does a pretty good job in their own zone of making sure there's a clear path, a clear vision
Yep.
for her.
Yep.
And I think that is true. So what hurts them is, when they, as you said, make those mistakes. It seems very reminiscent of what I'm talking about on Locked On Kraken, but it's cleaning up things when you're winning 50-50 puck battles. When is a
Yep.
good time to take a penalty? When is not a good time to take a penalty, especially when you're taking a 5-minute major as one of our leading scorers, just things of that nature. So I'm very curious to see, though, how things work out for Toronto. They had snapped their skid. I did a little something on social media about that because we had talked about that, Rachel, in the last episode. But now they find themselves once again having to restart and to find a win. And this is coming at a time where there are other teams that are starting to figure things out. And is Toronto going to get left behind? And how will this Ottawa change of scenery, as we mentioned, can this be what propels them forward? But we've talked a lot about Toronto, we've talked a lot about Ottawa, but surprisingly that was not all that happens, right, in this last week. So Rachel, what were some other teams or performances that really stood out for you?
Yeah, I think for me, the other big thing that stands out right now is how the Minnesota Frost have integrated their new players into an already championship
Mhm.
team, right? And you look at Claire Thompson, who's technically a rookie, but not really a rookie. Like she
Right.
doesn't count as a rookie, right? But she was their top pick in the draft, followed by Britta Curl in the second round. And Britta Curl is a true rookie and
Mhm.
the 2 of them are huge contributors to this Frost team that was already very good that you're like, Kendall Coyne Schofield is like just a nice to have in some ways, which sounds crazy to say.
Right. Right.
But, the 3 of them are performing excellently, and Boston made the game, on the second very spicy Susanna Tapani with 2 goals in the 3rd period and got them back into it for sure. They had to win in OT, but Britta Curl with that OT winner, it was her 4th goal of the season. Claire Thompson had 2 assists in that game. She leads the league in points right now, and so like, I just feel like they're just a machine that is gonna
Yeah.
keep on rolling, and, they haven't played perfectly either, but they find ways to win, and they have the tools to do it.
Yeah, you mentioned, Susanna Tapani, one of the players that was a part of that trade that we saw last season. And that, of course, you were recapping the most recent game between Boston and Minnesota on
Mhm.
January 2nd. We also, of course, you had the Ottawa-Toronto game, but Toronto was able to get a win over Boston, a 4-2 win. And it was actually, we talked about Jessica Condas. She got her first PWHL goal in her first start, on her first shift, on her first shot.
Yep.
That's massive.
Unreal.
I mean,
Unreal.
yeah, just, stay ready, so you ain't got to get ready is what I was saying on social media about that. So that's the Toronto team that we know has promise. They beat Boston, Montreal, Minnesota, another regulation win for Minnesota, or excuse me, for Montreal, and then Ottawa, New York was an interesting game. Ottawa getting that win against the New York Sirens, I think is huge. So they get the win over the Sirens earlier in the week. Then they get this win, a very emotional game over Toronto. So even before the trade, Rachel, it seems like maybe things are starting to click for Ottawa. And I mean, I kind of love to see it. Mostly though, because I just love to see a shakeup in the standings. If we look at the standings as we get ready for another weekend of action, it is still Minnesota at the top. That New York Sirens team. Again, we were wondering whether we'd start to see a few chinks in the chain with either Minnesota or New York. Dropping that game to Ottawa, I think, was probably surprising to a few people, but the Sirens still in that second spot right above Boston. Then you have Montreal, Ottawa, and of course, Toronto, who is still struggling. But Rachel, we talked about the international game and maybe why there should be an equivalent of what we're seeing now, World Junior Championships on the women's side, but we do have U18s coming up. So we're actually going to read and respond to some of the comments that we got from that last episode while also getting you ready for the PWHL. And while also getting you ready for the PWHL action coming up this weekend, including the first takeover tour stop in Seattle. All of that coming up on today's episode of the Women's Hockey Report. Today's episode of the Women's Hockey Report brought to you by our good friends Rocket Money. Now, has Rocket Money helped you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? Well, I can definitely tell you, as someone who uses Rocket Money, I appreciate having all of my bills, even the payments that I make out from my accounts, all in one place. And sometimes I'll even get an alert. It's like, hey, you just sent this money out. That looks a little large, on the large side from this particular account. Did you mean to do that? And that's always great because you just get to know where your money is going, because Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel everything from unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending like I've experienced, and it can even help lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit in the year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of 500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. So cancel those unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Once again, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Rachel, a jam-packed episode of the Women's Hockey Report, but we had to get into that trade. We had some great action and even more to come, Rachel. So first, let's go through the docket. What are the games coming up? And then you and I will both give our pick for what we think will be the game of the week that you absolutely, as a women's hockey fan, don't want to miss. All right, so what's coming up? What's on deck?
So Saturday, we've got the Sirens facing Minnesota, which is a rematch of the game that I went to in person last time, where the Frost won in a shootout. So that's always fun. Sunday, we've got Montreal versus Boston. And then during the week, we've got Ottawa against New York, Boston against Minnesota, and in a second game on Wednesday, Montreal versus Toronto. And we didn't even talk about Montreal yet, but
I know,
like on fire.
Absolutely.
So very excited to get to talk more about them probably next week.
Yes. And speaking of Montreal, I mean, I kind of had to go homer here. I am the Locked on Kraken host. I will be in Seattle for some Kraken games, and we'll be able to make it for the first PWHL takeover tour in 2025. And that's coming to Climate Pledge Arena. So I get to see Montreal take on Boston on Sunday, January 5th. So I got to say, that's probably my selfish pick for game of the week. I think there's just going to be a lot of excitement there. Climate Pledge Arena, as we've talked about, has the record for the largest attendance for a Rivalry series game. So I'm very curious to see what the crowd is going to be like. We haven't explicitly talked about attendance, but I think it will be something that, especially after this game, I'll be curious to see where the league is with attendance. Not quite you know, you can't say it's a like for like, Rachel, right? Because they were just starting
Mhm.
around this time last year, whereas, we have a full now well, I guess December is the first full month of action. So anyway, but something to talk about. But I think if we take out that outlier, just for the excitement of the takeover tour, I think there's another game that both you and I have circled, which will probably be the game of the week.
Yeah, I mean, I don't wanna discount Montreal against Toronto in Vancouver, which in and of itself is crazy because neither team's home fans are gonna be there to, like, hate on the other one, so that'll be fun, but I do think the game of the week is Ottawa at New York, especially following the win over Toronto, Mashmeyer playing so well in net, like we said. New York really has a big job on its hands in that game,
Yep.
especially having lost to Ottawa already this season, I believe. And New York is like not as stable as they were at the beginning of the season, and they'll have already faced Minnesota. So this Ottawa New York game, I think, is going to be huge.
I think it's also interesting. A storyline coming out of New York is that Jill Saunier is back.
Hmm.
So how will that impact this team? As you said, that hasn't been as steady as some of the other teams, whether they're performing, just inconsistently, but consistent at inconsistency, or like Minnesota, just finding ways to win. I think New York is one of those teams where they have some figuring out to do, and probably a team like Ottawa is gonna like their chances going up against them. So that's gonna be huge. We will, of course, recap all of that action and stay tuned over the weekend, because hope to have some extra bonus content for you coming from CPA from Climate Pledge Arena out in Seattle. But Rachel, we want to close out today's show by talking about Women's World Junior Championships. Just in case you missed it, that doesn't exist yet, but we think, and some of you think, it should as well. But we do have a U18 tournament that we're going to talk about. So in response to our last episode, Nick over on Blue Sky, I'm in support, exclamation point. Thanks, Nick. We think so too. Though I will say the IIHF would probably still make it U20 to stay consistent with the men's side. I just have one question. When in the year would you put the tournament? And that is in line with what we heard from N Garcia 103 over on YouTube, also in support of women's junior championship, or world juniors, excuse me. Keep things consistent with the men's side. So that's twice that we've heard that. However, because of that consistency, I think they'd make it U20 rather than U22. Again, just one question, Rachel. When in the year would you put it? And we had someone over on Blue Sky, Alex, and I like this comment, Rachel. I think you could put the tournament in early to mid-November, or maybe late October. Now, if it's late October, Rachel, of course, if things stay the same with the PWHL, that means that you would maybe be disrupting or overlapping with preseason, but not with the regular season. And since this would
Right.
be a U22 tournament, it's not like there's an overlap in that pool of players.
Right. That's why I think it's good timing, because while you have preseason action, which quote unquote doesn't count, and we don't even get to see the preseason action as of now in the PWHL anyway,
Mhm,
you might as
mhm.
well put some women's hockey on TV to get us excited about the upcoming season and look toward the future of women's hockey. And then boom, you're in the PWHL season.
And so, from just those comments that we've read, it does seem that people are wanting it to stay consistent with what we see on the World Junior side, and maybe do a U20 as opposed to a U22. The more I think about it, Rachel, though, I kind of like the idea of starting U22. I didn't think I was going to, but I think that's kind of where I'm landing. How about you?
Well, it's hard because if we talk about that specific timing, it doesn't work because that's
Right,
when NCAA hockey is, right?
right,
And you have to be able to pull these players out from college. And when you talk about U22 versus U20, like for the men, U20 makes sense because these kids are already drafted at that point, or a
right.
lot of them are, right? But women's hockey players don't get drafted until the tail end of college. So like there is a puzzle to be worked out here in terms of timing and what would
Mhm.
work. If it's a U20 league, like, or tournament, you still have college kids
Yeah,
involved.
you do.
So you have the same problem either way, which is why I really think, at least to start, the timing would have to be outside the college season,
Mm.
unfortunately, and then just kind of go from there.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm also of the mind, U22 gets you closer to when they would be, then you're really talking about
The
pros
future of the
right,
PWHL.
exactly. Prospects not that have been already drafted, but people that are very close to being drafted. So you can create that buzz. But we did get a comment from Striatic, who I recognize from Locked On Kraken. So we love seeing Striatic follow us over here. I think regarding Women's World Juniors, there needs to be a discussion not just about the age range the players would be available to participate, but also what the tournament is meant to accomplish from a big picture business of women's hockey perspective. That's an interesting comment. It's definitely something that we see again. This U20 tournament, as Triadic goes on to say, is the ultimate prospect showcase. And is that what the IIHF would be trying to accomplish? On the women's side, is it more focused on the international game? Because whether you do U20, but I think especially if you're looking at U22, then you're also looking at who are going to be the up and comers for the senior national teams. Because
Yes.
again, after the tournament that's coming up right now, Rachel, the U18s, there's a massive gap. And so, unless you're tapped into the NCAA game, and not all federations, not all countries have players that come to the NCAA, then that's a huge gap there. Women's hockey is very NCAA centric, and one could argue that there should just be more hype around the NCAA Women's Frozen Four. I really like that comment, especially Rachel, because this year the Frozen Four will be not just in a state, but in a city where there is a PWHL team and on a campus that is very well known for women's hockey. That, of course, being with the Minnesota Gophers. So I think it's going to be really interesting. And Striatic has, comments also about thinking about how do you incorporate Canadian women's hockey fans, getting them
Yeah.
excited to cheer about American college teams and things of that nature. So I guess it just means that we're going to have to revisit this topic, right, Rachel?
Every year, I honestly, and these are all very good points. And the thing is that I think the ultimate goal for women's hockey, at least in my opinion, is for all the women who want to play at the professional level to have choices about their
Yes.
path to get there.
Yes.
And we don't have a junior hockey system for women at all. So it's all college, right?
Yep.
And that, or European leagues, right? And so that's the current path. And without a junior hockey system, like North American women's hockey players only really have one way to go. And that's why the Frozen Four is the central focal point for, up and coming women's hockey players.
Yep.
Should that be? The answer is probably no.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, you and I have this conversation a lot, but the PWHL, especially with how they're able to really reach their fan base and engage with the media market, is definitely more Canada centric. So what does that mean also for how the PWHL, or if the PWHL, will engage in youth sports as well? So lots of conversation here, but as we close out, a reminder that the U18 tournament is happening this week, Rachel, in Finland. So what's the quick breakdown there? How can folks tap in?
Well, they sort of can tap in, let's say.
Yeah.
So it is taking place in Finland. TSN's going to broadcast all the Team Canada and USA games. NHL Network is going to pull that feed only for the USA games. So, and it's not clear in terms of the medal rounds what that means for broadcasting, because right now, just on the schedule, they have, their preliminary games against Japan, Sweden, and Finland. There's 8 countries involved in the tournament, but 2 of those 3 games are at 3 a.m. because of the time difference. And of course, Finland, being the home country, gets the preferential time slots. in this one. So it's going to be a tough road for Americans to watch their team play in this tournament.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we will keep you updated. This U18 Women's Worlds happening between January 4th and January 12th in Finland. But that is our show, Rachel. Jam-packed show. Lots of emotions, especially on the front end, but very curious to see. And let us know in the comments, especially if you're watching on YouTube, who do you think won the trade? Toronto or Ottawa? And are you going to any PWHL takeover tour stops? Especially let us know if you'll be in Seattle. And if you see me, come say hi. But for Rachel Donner, my name, Erica L. Ayala, and you have been listening and or watching the Women's Hockey Report. We will be back once again every Saturday morning, just like when I used to watch One Saturday Morning cartoons. So we are going to replace that for our geriatric millennials. We hope you enjoy. But enjoy your day. Enjoy the PWHL action. And we will catch you next week. Peace out, everybody.